So, the actions of the person saying, I want my road repaired and government not doing anything, fix my road. When all of that is taken together and it gets wrapped up in polls and politicians see it and they say, Lord, we're going to lose if we don't do that. What do you think going to happen? Yes, they're going to make policies that totally unravel. And even though we have built institutions to protect against unreasonable policies, it can still happen. When you hear of a promise that you're going to increase the tax threshold to $3.5 million and it's going to cost $75 billion to do that. Of course, people are moved by that. And if you got a government that decided to do that, it would totally unravel fiscal discipline. Which is why I go back to my point. Thank God that people were listening rationally. I'm not saying everybody, because I'm certain that there are those who took that bait. But thankfully there are others that said, maybe that don't make sense. Right? So, growth. Now, whenever we talk about growth, it is like saying, the size of the economy is just going to increase. It's just going to get bigger. But the process to get it bigger is a mystery. We've been trying to grow the economy for ever. And the last time we saw any significant growth above, let's say, 4 or 5% was in the 70s when we grew by like 12% one year. Right? In the 60s, forgive me. In the 60s, yeah. Now, to get to that level of growth, right, it is either that you're going to discover some very valuable natural resource like oil or something, whatever it is, all right? It's either you discover that and you get increased resources from minerals. But that has its own challenges because, if you don't manage that well, you can end up in problems, right? Or you can produce some technology, innovation, right? Like the American economy, a lot of its growth is on innovation, production of technology. Or you could grow your economy by services, the provision of services which use the human resource to deliver the service. You could also grow your economy by being very strategic with your location to position yourself as indispensable to trade in the world. Logistics. Right? So there are many ways to do it, but the government has to be very strategic in what it is doing and how it aligns itself. But what are the obstacles to this? Bureaucracy is number one. And especially for Jamaica, where 70% of our economy is dependent on services. If bureaucracy is an obstacle to the delivery of service, then it is unlikely that you can grow rapidly. So you see why it is so necessary that the government has an efficient bureaucracy. When I say you don't want bureaucracy, bureaucracy is very important. Bureaucracy is necessary. Bureaucracy is the hallmark of modern institutions and governance. But when the bureaucracy becomes complicated, dense, and self-serving, it's an obstacle. And so we have to reform the Jamaican bureaucracy so that the services can grow. That's focus number one for us. But the other way to grow is to increase your productivity. Again, inefficient bureaucracy is an obstacle for productivity. But there is growth to be had by ensuring that our human resources can produce more with what they currently have. And that's where our effort is going to be in the next few years in this term, to get our human resources to produce more, right? And what does that entail? Number one, we have to upskill, reskill, and skill the Jamaican labor force. So it's all about education and the education system, but it's more so about that kind of on-the-job training, aligning the education system with industry, getting our people to embrace, adapt, and become native with technology, and getting our people to use their creative energies in more profitable, economistic ways. That's what we're going to be focused on. So it's efficiency in the banking sector, efficiency in tourism, efficiency in logistics, increasing the productivity in these areas will give you a bump up in your GDP growth each year. So that's a part of the effort. But there's another obstacle to growth in the economy, and I think that this obstacle cuts across everything, and that's security. Security. Now, that is where I think this administration has made, aside from the fiscal improvements, in security, we have made significant progress in the last 10 years, without question. Now, I'm not telling you that Jamaica is the safest place, but we are certainly safer today than we were a decade ago. All right? We have made major investments in our national security. We are far more sophisticated in our national security. And we are now in a position where we can look to move from the plane of security to the plane of peace. So right now, let me just give a little context. So the average Jamaican, they'll see a murder happen, and they will just say, the state has failed, the security forces don't know what they're doing, it's a gunman that shot another one or whatever. But that's not the case. Right? What has happened in Jamaica is that there has been a level of organized violence that has a profit motive that is not readily understood by the community experiencing the violence. So the community experiencing the violence believes, it's just two boy a fight, or one road down there don't like another road. But they're not understanding that there is someone who has a connection, probably in New York or in Miami, who goes and does what they call straw purchases, gets guns, has a contact with a shipper here and a ship and the what they call them, the consolidators, and brings the guns back into Jamaica. That is a high level of organization. And then there is someone who has to know who this person is who has the gun, go and make the contact. And then while they're making the contact, say, you have guns now, you have guns now. Okay, tell you what, I want you to control this area because, there's a shipment of drugs or whatever it is that is going to come through, and you hold off this place. Safe haven for criminals. Or maybe it's to say, well, you have guns now, extort. So what you see is, this one shooting that one because they have an argument over a girlfriend or so. But if you delve deeper behind it, it is these kinds of connections. Because our interpretation of gangs would be, some youngsters who have been marginalized and they are poor and the society treat them bad. In other words, we have a kind of romantic view that they are, robbing from the rich and giving to the poor. Absolutely not. And so when we've done our surveys of gangs, a couple of years ago, we had about 350 of them operating in Jamaica, controlling communities, infiltrating institutions, police, customs, all kinds of things. And so I'm trying to give you a different understanding of the problem. 70% of murders were attributed to gangs. They could be arrested, they're in prison, they pick up the phone, they call. Families have arguments in Jamaica, they call their brother here, and he sends a remittance and tell him, go and buy the shot from this one, and sends the guns down in the barrel, in the rice, and creates this problem for us. So we said no more of that. We did two things. One, we used states of public emergency, and we established a new law called the Zones of Special Operations to deal with communities at war. And we went about in a systematic way to undermine, degrade, and eliminate the gangs. So from 350 gangs, we are now below 100 gangs operating in Jamaica. So, the opposition was saying, oh, you don't have a plan. We didn't tell them. Because, anyway, some things you just have to do it. You can't telegraph it. And 2 years ago, I made the call. I said that, we need to now view well, first of all, I said that we need a parallel war on guns, because the focus has always been on drugs, which is just one side of the trade. And then I upgraded that call to say we need to have a war on gangs that is prosecuted in the way in which the war on terror was prosecuted. I mean, I'm seeing some movements now in that regard. I don't know if somebody was listening, but it seems to be that there are some serious policy measures now being taken on dealing with gangs. And in Jamaica, we have been very serious about dealing with the gangs. So now, when people see a massive fall off in murders this year, we are now 42% less murders this year than we were last year. But in 2023, we cut murders by 7%, and in 2024, we cut murders by, was it 23% or something like that, 23%. So, we've really had a massive impact on crimes generally and homicides in particular. Now, so there's a second phase of this. So we'll continue to erode and eradicate the gangs. But as we do,
in Alpha Sense, there's just a single button.
Violence emerging. And that is the social violence, the intimate partner violence, the violence in the disciplining of children, the domestic violence, just the kind of aggression in the society that leads to a crime in some form, which means that you are violating the physical person and inflicting pain and damage to the physical person. So we're going to have to deal with that that is not necessarily a police problem exclusively. That now requires a lot of social workers. It requires our schools to you know Jamaica has this view that the only way to discipline a child is to use some form of violence, whether it is to talk strongly or slap or to physically encroach on the person. I don't want to get into the debate. There are, as I said, when I'm speaking on these matters, if we could just divorce the cultural and historic things and just look at it from a practical, rational point of view as we are moving to a newer, better Jamaica. These are things that we have to address. And we have included now in our new cabinet the Ministry of National Security and Peace, because we are now going to be deliberate in moving now from crime to peace. Right. So it's not just the absence of violence, but it is the deliberate pursuit and guardianship of the safety and security of the people. It is a peace of mind. Right? That is what we're going to be pursuing. So we actually did do a very intense study on the issue of violence in the society. We empaneled a commission, and they have given us our report, and that report will be made public, and we'll go through an entire process of bringing in the entire society into this discussion as to how do we secure peace. Now, just think of this now. There's a community, some of you may know this community. It's East Kingston and Port Royal. And then there's another one, Central Kingston. And those were our historic residential and business communities on the waterfront. I mean, the waterfront anywhere in the world is the highest value real estate. But those communities, crime and violence took them over. But since our efforts in reducing crime, particularly the internecine gang wars, we are noticing that investors are taking some risk. We are seeing a major housing development taking place in East Kingston and Port Royal, right? And in Central Kingston, there are at least 3 developments going on, 3 huge high-rise buildings being built. That's the peace dividend. And when you bring peace to communities, people will invest. And that's how you get growth. So we are going to continue to press on the gangs, but we are also seeking to build peace. And this, I've stopped at these 3 things. But if you put all of these things together, Jamaica has never been in this position before, maybe at the beginning of our independence journey. But we have never had these alignments before, where we are dealing with some of the intractable problems, but having the kind of foresight in planning for the next stage and level of development. So if you think of it, what was the thing that concerned most Jamaicans? Crime, cut in half. Our murder rate has now moved from about 50 per 100,000. We're about 25 per 100,000. And we're going to continue to push to what the regional average is, which is about 15, and we want to go below the regional average. The US is about 3.6 per 100,000. We're heading towards that. Now, can you imagine we are getting 4 million tourists per year, with that level? Can you imagine if we're at 3? I mean, we wouldn't have hand, as we say in Jamaica, right? And that's what we want, right? We push. The debt was as high as 144%. Now it's at 60, and we will reach we will probably, I don't want to speak about fiscal targets, but we'll certainly better the target. The target is to be 60% debt to GDP. I'm certain we'll do better than that. We're now 2 grades below investment grade. When you're at investment grade, you don't really have to borrow. But when you're at investment grade, you get the lowest interest rates. People consider you a safe haven for them to park capital. And that's where we want to be, right? It's just to move from there to investment grade, we have to satisfy some of the demands of the people. So the political pressure does not create a political economy that destroys the fiscal discipline. And that's why we're doing some programs to release the pressure and the pressure points and the pain points of the people. So we have the Spark programs. We're doing 660 roads across Jamaica. We have a massive water program, a massive highway program, a massive housing program. We have to do a review of the social safety net program part because it seems not to be properly aligned with what we offer versus what people need. Path would be the equivalent of your social security program. We have to rethink that to make sure that it is effective. We're doing massive things in rethinking our electricity arrangements, reduce energy in the country. So, we're taking all the right steps to improve the quality of lives of Jamaicans. So my closing point is that Jamaica is at an inflection point. An inflection point, for those of you who know mathematics, is when the rate of change of a curve, it increases more rapidly. And so for us, our inflection point is that the rate of effort is going to yield far more results. And therefore, we are I think, in a good place. And I'm privileged, I consider it, and humbled to be at the helm at this time. And again, I thank you for your attention.